All right, guys, hello and welcome to another episode of Thinking Out Loud. We're going to be going over a few different things today in relation to the crisis in Gaza. We're going to have an emphasis on the BDS movement, some of the victories we've seen around that. That's the boycott, divest, and sanctions movement. We've seen some interesting wins and some leverage being pushed with that movement. We're also going to kind of look at some of the diplomatic angles of this, maybe some of the geopolitical angles of this towards the end. And we'll also be looking at some of the larger actions and momentum that we are seeing around this crisis, around people mobilizing to put a stop to this conflict, right? So we'll go ahead and jump into our source material here, guys. The first one I have here is from the Economic Times. It says, here's why Starbucks faces over $11 billion loss in value. So this is something maybe some of you guys have heard or seen scrolling online. Obviously, Starbucks has had a rough go of it the last few years. What with the large unionization movement, we've seen a lot of successes with that. And this is really a spillover of those successes because those people who have gotten organized are now flexing a little bit of those not just organizational muscles, but political muscles, moving beyond just the demand for a better labor contract, things like that, using the organizations, the unions that they've created to push a political agenda, right? So go ahead and jump into the reading here. Says, in a tumultuous turn of events, Seattle-based Starbucks Corporation has suffered a staggering $11 billion loss in value, marking a 9.4% decline that has set off alarm bells within the company's corridors. The genesis of these woes stems from an unforeseen tweet from Starbucks Workers United, representing a faction of its baristas expressing solidarity with Palestinians. This seemingly innocuous gesture triggered a chain reaction, leading to widespread boycotts that have severely impacted the coffee giant's financial standing. Since November 16th, coinciding with the Red Cup Day promotion, Starbucks shares have nosedived by 8.96%, accounting for the mammoth $11 billion loss. This catastrophic plummeting, along with reports of sluggish sales and a lukewarm reception to their holiday lineup, has cast a shadow over the company's prospects. Amidst a mounting boycott linked to Israeli-Gaza tensions, brewing discontent poses significant challenges for the company's future, remarked an industry analyst encapsulating the gravity of the situation. So as we can see here, guys, 9% dive in stock price is pretty fucking huge over a month period. That's over a month period. And you put that on top of the financial and corporate woes that Starbucks has had as a result of unionization and some of the obviously negative publicity that they've gotten, online in particular, not so much in the actual mainstream media, for trying to bust unions and stuff like this. I mean, this is really kind of a perfect storm disaster for the company. And this, I just wanted to highlight this because this is a great example of why boycotts work, why boycotts are important. Obviously none of us here in the United States are at a point, and we do not have the organizational capacity, and also I do not condone picking up arms against the state of the United States to, stop its imperial projects overseas, right? But these sort of actions are one of the most important ways that we can support decolonization, support the dismantling of the U.S. empire overseas. And something else I want to highlight here is this example was Starbucks Union, Starbucks Baristas United, or whatever. This is a great example of why unions are so goddamn important, right? Unions are the building block upon which any political action is, going to get done, right? You can have all different kinds of more militant or radical political organizations. You can have, NGOs or community groups and things like that. And those are all important because those organizations really help coordinate and draw networks and ties and webs of interconnectedness and solidarity with unions, with other organizations, with tenants, with everybody, right? Those are important. They really kind of serve as a vanguard for whole movements, right? But the union is really the building block or the cell of any large political movement. And the reason why that is because, one, that is the first place where most workers are all together in one place, especially in a time, 21st century, where we have automatized work relations and particularly living relations, right? Like, people don't get together in community sense the way they do. One place workers are always together is in the workplace. And, the nature of capitalism, the capitalist class puts the levers of production in our hands. They may own it, but us being the workers that do the labor, produce the wealth, we have the levers in our hands, right? So when we have unions that have gone from being, okay, I am working to get better wages, I'm striking to get better wages, I'm striking to get better conditions, better benefits, things like that. When you go from that to radicalizing those workers in that union, so now the majority of the people in that union are radical and militant, you have really created a battalion, so to speak, in the class war. And again, that's where our more radical political organizations, Communist Party, Party for Socialism, Liberation, DSA, you take your pick of which, right? That's the job of those organizations, those militant groups, is to help radicalize the unions and build interconnectedness between the unions, right? And I just wanted to highlight this because it's just such a great example of what happens, not only, one, once you organize unions and you build a lot of solidarity amongst them, but once you begin the process of radicalization and making people realize that all of these issues, from their work conditions to their living conditions to the empire overseas, are all interconnected. You begin to build the solid basis upon which you can build a church of revolution, so to speak, right? Going on here, guys, says this market downfall has set a new record, with Starbucks witnessing a decline in stocks for 12 consecutive sessions, the lengthiest slump since its inception in 1992. Presently trading at around $95.80 per share, a stark contrast to its yearly zenith of $115. So it's a pretty huge drop, especially if you have thousands of dollars or thousands of shares in these companies. The company faces an arduous path to recovery. Attempting to assuage concerns, CEO Laxman Narasimhan, in a recent analyst call, expressed optimism in the company's diverse outreach channels and its ability to engage customers. The repercussions of the boycott have transcended borders, with Starbucks in Egypt reportedly downsizing its workforce due to financial strains induced by the boycott's ripple effects. This move stands as a testament to the tangible impact of the widespread global protests against brands affiliated with Israel. And as we're going to see, we have more examples of this. Boycotts work, guys, especially when they're done on a global scale. And, we have Starbucks Workers United helping to spearhead this boycott with this particular company. But there are organizations and unions all over the world boycotting Israeli products. And we have really, despite legislation and policy being pushed through that attempts to make these boycotts illegal, despite state pressure, despite state crackdown in the streets of organized protests, we are seeing the BDS movement and other solidarity with Palestine movements gaining momentum around the world and beginning to shift. Obviously, we have seen a huge shift in just the rhetoric and the perspective of the average person around Israel. That alone is a huge victory. But now, with that shift having occurred, we're beginning to see not just rhetoric change, but people being called to action in a serious and tangible way that actually has effects. I mean, the people involved in this cost Starbucks Corporation $12 billion. They are feeling that and they are understanding that. And as this process continues with other corporations, other companies, other organizations, other institutions, the more you see that, the more pressure it puts on the state of Israel, because then the people who ostensibly have positions of power, we workers do have power. Obviously, we're seeing it here. But those who hold the levers of power begin to put pressure on Israel from all these different angles to stop what they are doing, because it is hurting their bottom line. Because as we know, in capitalism, the bottom line is the only thing that matters. Going on here with some of the reading, guys, another example of some of the effects this boycott has had is we have this from Financial Times. It says Puma to end sponsorship of Israel's national football team. It says Puma is terminating its sponsorship of Israel's national football team in a decision the German group said was taken a year ago and was not related to renewed calls for consumer boycotts, as Israel continued its assault on Gaza in response to the October 7th Hamas attacks. Okay, so obviously in this, the company is saying that it's unrelated. But it talks in this article as well about, Israel's football team sucks. And that's one part of it. But there is not a bone in my body, a thread in my body that doubts the fact that the amount of boycotts and publicity around this was the final nail in the coffin for Puma to pull its sponsorship for this, right? So let's go on here, guys. It says, from the end of next year, the world's third biggest sportswear company will no longer provide kit to the squad after deciding not to renew a contract with the Israel Football Association. The partnership signed in 2018 triggered a boycott campaign with activists accusing Puma of supporting Israeli settlements in the West Bank, considered illegal by most of the international community, given the IFA includes clubs based in such settlements. Puma has rejected the allegations, saying that it only sponsors the national team and not club-level activities. That's like domestically for Israel, correct? The pro-Palestinian BDS campaign claimed on X that the decision to end the partnership was a direct response to its long-standing calls for a boycott, saying, "We have forced Puma to abandon its sponsorship of the Israel Football Association." However, the IFA rejected BDS's claims, calling it a quote-unquote pathetic attempt to mislead, and saying it had an option to extend the contract by 2 years until 2026, but decided in September against doing so after failing to reach agreement over improved contractual terms and conditions. Okay, so with this, guys, I want to point out this section right here. A lot of these companies that are getting boycotted are in relation to supporting Israeli settlements in the West Bank. And now I can't speak specifically to Puma, but with the BDS campaign, we have seen a lot of successes with companies shutting down or cutting back workforces in the West Bank. I believe it was, don't quote me, it was Kellogg's or one of those big cereal or food production companies that had a production facility or shipment facility in a West Bank area that was on occupied stolen land. And due to a boycott and due to political pressures, organizational pressures put onto that company, they actually ended up closing down the whole facility there. And now, look, obviously, it seems to me, and now, like, look, we'll never know for sure. We don't know what's happening in the smoke-filled boardroom. Maybe they are telling the truth about this is unrelated to the boycott. But again, like I was saying, I believe that it was a final nail in the coffin. Right. I think they're looking at this and they're like, okay, we've already been kind of on the fence about Israel due to its poor performance. With this all happening, now is a good time for us to pull out before we receive more negative public publicity, right? Going on with a little bit more of the reading here, says, following a similar backlash from pro-Palestinian activists in 2021, Ben & Jerry's announced it was inconsistent with their values for Ben & Jerry's ice cream to be sold in the occupied Palestinian territory. Its owner, Unilever, eventually sold the local branding rights to a licensee, which continues to sell ice cream in the region. So just another example. We have seen this multiple times over the last few years, and as the scale of these organizational efforts, boycott efforts, mass demonstrations continues to accelerate, I don't have a doubt in my mind that we're going to see more and more of this. It's been a little bit discouraging, obviously, to see not enough done from global leaders of countries, but we are seeing a lot being done, a lot being said from NGOs, things like Doctors Without Borders, Jewish Voices from Peace, and of course we would like to see more from people in positions that have large platforms, like celebrities and different things like that. But I don't doubt that those things are coming, especially as we see more and more things like this that just are making headlines as a matter of course because they involve economic well-being for some of these corporations, right? But I want to transition here, just a couple of examples of ways we are seeing success with the BDS movement. We are seeing it make a difference, and we're only been in this for a month. Of course, we'd like to see it move quicker with any of these issues, with any issue. But unfortunately, building mass movements and putting political pressure on large corporations and political entities takes time, a lot of time. But I'm very hopeful with the huge upsurge that we've seen recently that we're going to begin to see it snowball and accelerate in a huge way. We're going to transition here, guys, to this article from The Guardian. Hang on. It says, boycotts and sanctions helped rid South Africa of apartheid. Is Israel next in line? So with this, we're going to kind of draw some parallels between the BDS movement. Obviously, the BDS movement, its leaders have said that the success of the boycott against South Africa was one of its biggest inspirations, right? But we're going to kind of look at this through a cultural lens as well and pick it apart and kind of, provide a little bit of analysis as to why I do believe that this BDS movement is going to pick up the momentum and have the lasting cultural effect that the BDS type movement had for Apartheid South Africa, right? Jumping in here, guys, says, ask an older generation of white South Africans when they first felt the bite of anti-apartheid sanctions, and some point to the moment in 1968 when their Prime Minister B.J. Forster banned a tour by the England cricket team because it included a mixed-race player, Basil de Oliveira. After that, South Africa was excluded from international cricket until Nelson Mandela walked free from prison 22 years later. The De Oliveira affair, as it became known, proved a watershed in drumming up popular support for the sporting boycott that eventually saw the country excluded from most international competition, including rugby, the great passion of the white Afrikaners, who were the base of the ruling Nationalist Party and who bitterly resented being casted out. So I highlighted this section here because it talks about the De Oliveira affair being a watershed moment. Now, to drum up more global, truly affecting change, global support for their BDS movement, right? Have we seen that yet? This watershed moment? I don't know that we have, but when we see such a large market share and drop in stock price for companies like Starbucks, inking up like this, beginning to manifest, if we haven't had the watershed moment yet, I believe that we will, given more time. Again, like I was saying earlier, one of the sort of disappointing things is not seeing, and we have seen artists boycott going to Israel, but it would be really huge if even one of these watershed moments could really be even just one pretty damn well-known artist, actor, any of this, that's in the mainstream that is relevant for young people coming out saying, I am not going to tour in Israel. Like, that's all it takes with anything in life, guys. Sometimes all it takes is a moment, and we can see these things accelerate and begin to enter into even more in the mainstream. I mean, we have already seen it. I mean, I know we have a disposition to be a little bit cynical or not have a lot of hope with these things. But if you look at where we even were 3 or 4 years ago with the discussion around Palestine, where almost everybody, liberals in particular, supported Israel, and where we are now with the discussion, it's absolutely huge. And that alone is just from the efforts of organizers and independent media and things like that. And so now we're at a stage of informing people where we're breaking into the shell of the more mainstream. You can already see it with mainstream media reports. You can even see it with some of the rhetoric coming out of Biden recently, where he's with Blinken and stuff talking about, just recently, the other day or today, they were talking about not sending a whole shipment of assault rifles due to what's happening in the West Bank. So, our information campaigns, our organizational campaigns have already pierced the shell of the bubble of propaganda that surrounds Israel. And part of that is, of course, due to their inefficiency, their absolutely cartoonish portrayals of their propaganda. But we are there now. Now, when is the moment going to be where it blasts off and really explodes the shell and we sort of overrun the narrative? I don't know, but if you consider the horrendous crimes Israel is continuing to perpetuate in Gaza, and you consider the fact that we're seeing these successes, it could be any day now. You never know when somebody or something is going to shift in a huge way, guys. Going on here says, for others, the moment of reckoning came years later. in 1985 when foreign banks called in South Africa's loans. It was a clear sign that the country's economy was going to pay an even higher price for apartheid. But the rise of the popular anti-apartheid boycott over nearly 30 years made its mark on South Africans who were increasingly confronted by a repudiation of their system. Ordinary Europeans pressured supermarkets to stop selling South African products. British students forced Barclays Bank to pull out of the apartheid state. The refusal of a Dublin shop worker to ring up a Cape grapefruit led to a strike and then a total ban on South African imports by the Irish government. By the mid-1980s, 1 in 4 Britons said they were boycotting South African goods, a testament to the reach of the anti-apartheid campaign. The musicians' union blocked South African artists from playing on the BBC, and the cultural boycott saw most performers refusing to play in the apartheid state, although some, including Elton John and Queen, infamously put on concerts at Sun City in the Bophuthatswana homeland. Okay, so a few different things here, guys, with this. What brought down the apartheid regime in South Africa? It was a whole coalition or interconnected series of events, right? Obviously, one of them was their BDS movement, the boycott movement. It made it to the white nationalist ruling class in South Africa. It made the process and system of apartheid too expensive to maintain. Because again, we've talked before about how there are different elements in the ruling class, right? And these elements within the ruling class, some of it may be white nationalists, some of it may be Christian evangelicals, some of it may be this one type of capitalist with this other type of capitalist with these other people in the government or in this party, right? They build coalitions and they cement power. It's not one cohesive unit, even if a lot of their interests align, right? So when you have coalitions like this, with any kind of coalition in politics, its weak point is those connections, right? So when you have a situation, one of the effects that brought down South Africa apartheid was BDS boycotts. So that pressure on South Africa apartheid corporations who enjoy some of the benefits of what apartheid brings, particularly you have a huge workforce of second-class citizens, black second-class citizens that you can exploit their labor for, right? But once those pressures get to a certain level where those corporations, doesn't need to be all of them, enough of those corporations no longer have a big enough vested interest in apartheid, they start to split with these other elements in the coalition that are allowing apartheid to happen. They start putting pressure because they are the ones donating and bankrolling and reinforcing institutions and politicians. They start putting pressure of like, you need to abandon this. You need to do something about this because it's fucking up our bottom line. And we know money rules the world, right? So that's one part of it. Two, you have domestic insurgency. Obviously, Nelson Mandela, the ANC, African National Congress, all these different elements of domestic insurgency against the police surveillance state of apartheid South Africa, right? Three, you have outside resistance. You have things going on in Angola, resistance, outright guerrilla warfare, right? All of these different things. And then four, you finally have a cultural shift in the attitude towards South Africa, where people as a whole around the world are no longer willing not only to support this, but to turn a blind eye to it. So I ask you, in relation to all these things that we discussed here, how much of this are we seeing? We are definitely seeing the growing BDS movement. I don't believe it's at the point that it was at the breaking of South Africa's apartheid regime, but we are getting there. All these things, again, are a snowball, a cumulative effect, and we have already seen huge amounts of progress. Two, obviously in Gaza, in Palestine, there is a mass domestic resistance movement. Everything from peaceful resistance to legal resistance to guerrilla warfare in the terms of Hamas. Three, there is outside, resistance to the apartheid regime, particularly Nasrallah with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon and to the north of Israel. Obviously, we are seeing that. We have the Houthis in Yemen who are, literally sinking and taking over ships, Israeli ships, or any ship, they said, that will bring materials into the apartheid Israel state, right? And that's an incredibly important choke point of international commerce at the Bab el Mandeb Strait, right? So we have outside resistance, obviously resistance from Iran. Obviously, we've talked about we would like to see more diplomatic pressure from some of these more reactionary regimes, particularly UAE and Saudi Arabia and stuff, Qatar as well, although they've been slightly better. But we are seeing outside support. And as tensions continue to escalate into a situation that's already become something of a regional war, to be honest, it is, you've heard a lot of debate around this being, is it a regional war or not, or is it a regional war coming? It is already a regional war. It's just all the parties involved in this regional war, including the United States, are really tiptoeing around the idea of escalation. But again, getting off tangent here, we are seeing outside insurgency. And we are seeing the global narrative around this issue, around apartheid Israel, around the genocide of Gaza, beginning to shift. And I think, we are going the way of what happened in apartheid South Africa, right? Of course, apartheid South Africa was not held up to nearly the same degree by the U.S. empire as Israel is, because obviously the U.S. empire did support apartheid Israel or South Africa, but its vested interest in it wasn't as large due to the nature of Israel being this, quote unquote, landed aircraft carrier in one of the, pivotal levers of geopolitics of the entire world, right? So I think it will be an even harder fight, but I think that we are getting there, and even the shift in narrative and discussion, although they've refused to act, obviously, in the UN General Assembly and the Security Council of the U.S. hasn't. We are beginning to see that they are having to reel this back narratively, and I don't doubt that, U.S. officials in Israel are putting pressure on them. Like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, we already know that Blinken has talked about, like, you need to wrap this up quickly. You need to scale back some of this horror, otherwise we are not going to be able to continue to support you. Now, of course, the question is always, where is that line with the United States? Where is that line with the United States where they'll finally cut off support? It's going to come. It has to come, because at the beginning of the war in Ukraine, we heard unconditional support for all this time, and then gradually over time that unconditional support got us to where we are now, where they're talking about, like, well, maybe Ukraine should capitulate. Have no doubt that is what's going to happen in Israel. It's just, unfortunately, in the same case as Ukraine, it's a matter of how many people are going to have to die before we get there, right? Moving on there, guys. That's really all I have for you from this article. I wanted to touch on this quick. Obviously, we've said multiple times already that we would like to see more done from countries around the world. But something that does give me hope is the amount of people that we have seen either suspend relations or withdraw ambassadors. I have a list here of countries that have withdrawn diplomats or done other political, steps against Israel. We have Bahrain, Belize, Bolivia, Chad, Chile, Colombia. Colombia was really huge too, guys, mind you, because Colombia has been called the Israel of Latin America. Obviously, that we have Gustavo Petro in office there, who's a leftist and actually a former leftist guerrilla fighter, really amazing person. And he, was very, very visceral against Israel in different tweets and statements and speeches and things. Then we have Honduras, Jordan, Turkey. I mean, Jordan's huge as well, considering it's another client state of the U.S. empire. And, of course, South Africa. Of course, we're going to have South Africa here. But these are positive, and some of this you may have already known, but these are positive trends. Going along with this, guys, we have seen, the 8th straight week of mass demonstrations all over the world, strikes around the world. I wanted to touch on some of the more recent ones. I have this article here from Al Jazeera. It says, world condemns Israel's war on Gaza as it marches for Palestine. This is coming out of the 10th of December with Global Memorial Day or something like that. Let's go on here. I just have a little bit of this highlighted. Let's see. Demonstrators rallied across the world to show their solidarity with Palestinians and to protest against the Israeli army's onslaught in the Gaza Strip on World Human Rights Day. Sorry, not World Memorial. World Human Rights Day, guys. Protests were held in Istanbul, Copenhagen, The Hague, Tunis, Melbourne, Tokyo, Belgrade, Sarajevo, Karachi, Sana'a, Rabat. I do want to point out Istanbul. Because Turkey has historically had, this is one of the things too, we've seen a lot coming out of Turkey, although of course Turkey is this weird anomaly. It's always playing between NATO and between BRICS and other powers. Of course it is. Look at where it's at geographically, right? Of course it's going to play both sides. But historically, Turkey has been a pretty staunch ally of Israel due to its relations with the United States. But some of the rhetoric we've seen out of Turkish leaders is pretty incendiary given that, and that is a positive sign. But again, with all these different things, again, on the diplomatic front, we want to see more. I am wondering where the line will be. That kind of remains to be seen here, guys. It says, every year on December 10th, the international community observes Human Rights Day to commemorate the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations General Assembly in 1948. Interesting that you don't really see much about that in the U.S., in our U.S. culture, right? A large number of people gathered in Istanbul on Sunday to protest against Israeli attacks on Gaza. Thousands also gathered in Western Balkan capitals to show their support for Palestine. In the Serbian capital, Belgrade, Palestinian and Serbian flags were flown at demonstration in front of the main government building. Banners and placards demanded ceasefire, free Palestine, and the genocide, etc. I just want to show you a few of these images if you're watching. I'm sorry if you are just listening. I'll try to kind of describe them briefly. But I wanted to show these images because of the scale, and I know you guys have already seen some of this. But we are in, the 8th or 9th week of this now, guys, and we are still seeing huge mass movements. The mass movements haven't petered out or haven't dwindled down. They have gotten bigger as time is going on. That is a positive sign. Palestinian flags fly at pro-Palestinian rally, Copenhagen, Denmark. It's always great to see these things coming out of the imperial core in Western Europe and the United States, right? This picture depicts, the narrow streets of Copenhagen just stuffed as far back to the horizon as possible with people, right? Representatives from several non-governmental organizations gathered in front of the Hagia Sophia Grand Mosque in Istanbul to stage a protest against Israeli attacks on Gaza. And again, guys, you can look up the Hagia Sophia Grand Mosque. Huge mosque, huge. I mean, there's so many people around it. It's completely surrounded. Amazing. People in Rabat, Morocco, in solidarity with Palestinians amid Israel's relentless bombardment of Gaza. Again, another street stuffed. I'm saying stuffed with people. No room to move. I mean, crazy. It looks like a Travis Scott concert. Ha ha ha. Pro-Palestinian demonstrators gathered in front of the Parliament of Victoria, Melbourne, Australia. Again, guys, it's amazing to me seeing the amount of resistance, people putting their jobs on the line, people taking time out of their day to organize on all these different levels in the imperial core countries or in the Five Eyes in the case of Australia. Melbourne just stuffed full of people. I'll just flick through some of these. Tunisia National Salvation Front opposition coalition in Tunis. Again, a huge amount of people. But that's really all I have for you guys in terms of some of the more recent actions. Again, just a huge amount of support globally. We're already spilling over here, so I'm going to keep this last part quickly. We've talked about wanting to see more diplomatic insistence coming from the global community, global leaders. We are seeing it in the United Nations, but these these countries could be doing more and they're not, particularly the reactionary regimes in the Middle East. Countries could be doing sanctions. Although, of course, one reason why they're not is because technically unilateral sanctions are against the law. You would never know it in our business dealings with the United States. They hand them out like fucking candy on Halloween. But they are technically against the law, and that is why we are seeing that. But, you see different analysts talking about, it's we can be doing this. There comes a time where maybe we do see countries break international law sometimes. There comes a time where maybe you should consider breaking international law and doing more. I know there's more that these leaders could be doing. But again, everyone is playing the political agenda here. But alongside the political agenda, we do have escalations occurring. Obviously, Houthis, like we talked about, the Houthis refusing to let through Israeli ships, sinking any ship. They are talking about sinking any ship that's going to bring or be doing commerce with Israel through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. But on that, we have seen escalations. This is out of the Jerusalem Post on the border with Lebanon and Israel, right? Says a Hezbollah MP warned that Israeli airstrikes that caused widespread damage in the town of Atarun near the Israeli-Lebanese border on Sunday were a new escalation. Hassan Fadlallah warned that the terrorist movement would respond to the escalation in new ways in nature of the weapons used or targeted sites. Sorry this isn't highlighted, guys. It was, but it got apparently deleted. Okay, on Monday morning, at least 6 rockets were fired from Lebanon toward northern Israel and were intercepted by the Iron Dome, according to the IDF spokesperson's unit. The military responded with artillery fire, targeting several locations along the Lebanese border. Additionally, on Monday, Lebanon's Nida al-Watan newspaper reported that a gradual escalation had been taking place in recent days, coinciding with a demand by Israel that Hezbollah withdraw to the north of the Litani River in Lebanon in accordance with UN Security Council Resolution 1701. But the big thing I want to talk about here is this tweet here. It says, on Sunday, the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon said that a watchtower inside the UNIFIL position near Abel Kameh in southern Lebanon was hit by shelling on Saturday afternoon. No injuries were reported in the incident. Any targeting of UNIFIL positions and any use of any of our positions to launch attacks across the blue line is unacceptable, the interim force said. After 2 months of active shelling along the blue line, the potential for miscalculation that could trigger a wider conflict is increasing. And I wanted to highlight that along with officials from both Hezbollah and IDF. They are talking about this being an escalation in Lebanon. Obviously, like I just said, the actions being taken out from the Houthis in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait is an escalation. Okay, we talked earlier about how this is already a regional war. Just because it's not huge and widespread and it's more surgical and temperate in its action does not mean that it isn't already a regional war. But the thing is, when you have this struggle going on in Lebanon with Hezbollah versus the IDF, and then you have the Houthis here, then you have the U.S. military bringing 2 aircraft carriers, and we could debate about that's more of a show of force. I don't really believe they have any intention of using them, bringing them into the Persian Gulf, not even the Mediterranean, to support Israel. What it really is to scare Iran into not getting more involved, sending a message that those aircraft carriers are there for Iran. Don't make any mistake. So then you have that. You have all of these elements, and then you have, of course, U.S. occupation forces in Iraq. You have all different kinds of coalitions of militant groups there attacking U.S. targets. You have all these different regions here that any spark, like it says here from the UN, the potential for a miscalculation that could trigger a wider conflict is increasing. The regional war is here. The problem with having all these different fronts of resistance, which is of course positive, we need to see this sort of decolonization effort, but you're looking at a situation with all these different fronts, all these different variables, with all these different leaders and organizations. Who knows what the fuck could happen that turns this into a full-scale war? And if Iran gets pulled into it, you can bet your ass, or Syria gets pulled into it again, up to a certain line, we're already beginning to see some conflagration there. Then you could get Russia involved, and then you see this situation spiral not just into a regional war, but a world war, right? So the situation is incredibly tenuous, incredibly dangerous, and I encourage everyone watching my show to continue watching my show, but keep engaging with independent media analysis for these unfolding day-by-day events, because it really is not just a day-by-day look through the microscope, but an hour-by-hour look through the microscope of what may happen. And, of course, no one can see the future, but I myself am incredibly hopeful with some of the things we talked about at the beginning of the show, that we are seeing momentum in this larger movement. I am also terrified that if we don't see more diplomatic pressure, a risk-taking policy from the reactionary Arab regimes and the global community, political community at large, to go outside of the constraints of the UN institution to do something against Israel, that we will, if we don't see enough political pressure, we will see this regional war turn into a worldwide conflagration. That's terrifying, right? Again, guys, I've already gone way over 30 minutes, so I'll cut this off here. Don't forget to, like and subscribe, comment, please, if you love this content. Support my independent media work at Patreon at patreon.com/entitledmillennials. That's $1 a month. And those one-time donations from you guys through PayPal at paypal.me/entitledmillennials are always huge, greatly appreciated, especially this time of year when I'm trying to get Christmas presents for the kiddo. So I would greatly, greatly appreciate it. Again, guys, as always, I love hanging out with you, love talking the issues with you, and I look forward to speaking again with you soon. Bye-bye.